Some in this audience are very sophisticated and drawn to the arena of finance. Others find input and output tables, yield curves, and economic indicator indices to be an impenetrable foreign language. You know who you are. Either way, we're spending $1 trillion a year on interest on the national debt, and approximately 37% of Americans cannot readily cover a $400 unexpected expense like a medical bill or a car repair. That goes up to an estimated 53% when the emergency is $1,000. So in this boat together, we find ourselves not looking particularly self-sufficient in what appears to be quite a brewing storm. I've commented before that economists, in my experience, are regularly described as being surprised. Isn't that what they always say? So economists were surprised today, right? And I always picture them in front of mirrors practicing their surprise expressions like clown school, to get their certifications. Tonight's speaker certainly doesn't wait to be surprised. In fact, she operates an intelligence gathering organization with sources around the world to educate herself and her subscribers on how public policy and economic systems are profoundly affecting capital flow and the economic waters in which we swim today. Founder and publisher of the Solari Report, host of Financial Rebellion on CHD-TV, Catherine has worked at the highest levels of finance and government. And like most of our speakers, she is a great proponent of transparency and accountability. Catherine has served as the managing director and member of the board of directors of the Wall Street Investment Bank Dillon Read, as assistant secretary of housing and federal housing commissioner at the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development in the first Bush administration, and was the president of Hamilton Securities Group. She has designed and closed over $25 billion of transactions and investments to date, and has led portfolio investment strategies for $300 billion of financial assets and liabilities. These days, however, you are just as likely to encounter Catherine's name in the rabbit holes many of us find ourselves crawling through in the middle of the night as we seek truth and understanding. You may be enlightened, agree or disagree with Catherine's perspective on where we are today, but as is forum tradition, we will most certainly leave here with a lot upon which to chew. She has been celebrated as an unusually effective manager, a master at strategy, and as having one of the best analytical minds of our time. Here tonight with some advice on how to navigate the opportunities and risks of today, please join me in welcoming one of central bank's most formidable enemies, Catherine Austin Fitts.
Oh, it's so wonderful to be here. And I have to tell you, thank you so much for coming out. It's such a beautiful spring night, and you're here to listen. And I just thank you for this and for supporting the Liberty Forum. So I'm glad to be here. I want to talk to you about your money. Is everybody interested in money? Raise your hand if you're interested in money. Okay, so I want to talk to you about your money, and will you control your money or will your money control you? Okay, so I'm all about solutions, and there is a ton of information that's public on my website, solari.com. Everything I talk about tonight, there's a wealth of resources to describe all the documentation behind it, and there's a wealth of information about what you can do. So I'm going to go quickly through a whole series of slides, but rest assured, you can find plenty more if you want to deep dive. And Jane and her team are going to put the PDF of my slides up on the website, so you don't have to take notes. You'll be able to get the PDF. So let's just dive in. One of my favorite quotes is from Steve Bartlett, who wrote Diary of a CEO. He's got a wonderful podcast. And he said, if you want long-term success in business, relationships, and life, you have to get better at accepting uncomfortable truth as fast as possible. When you refuse to accept an uncomfortable truth, you're choosing to accept an uncomfortable future. So first, I want to talk to you about some of the uncomfortable things staring us in the face with respect to our future. And then I'm going to talk about solutions. So who here has heard me talk about the financial coup d'etat? Raise your hand if you, okay, thank you. Okay, since fiscal 1998, the federal government has been intentionally, radically in violation of the financial management laws. So every year you probably send a 1040 and a check to the federal government to comply with the financial management laws, and just to let you know, they don't reciprocate. This complicated chart is up on my website. We have a special website just dedicated to financial shenanigans by the federal government. It's at missingmoney.solari.com. So my website is solari.com. This one is missingmoney.solari, but you can link to it from Solari. What I show in this chart is starting in 1998, a process began not that long after Mr. Epstein was introduced to the White House by Mr. Rubin, who later became Secretary of the Treasury. But a process began whereby 21 trillion went missing from the federal government at Department of Defense and HUD between fiscal 1998 and 2015. That process was described to me by the president of CalPERS. Anybody here beneficiary of CalPERS? Okay, so the president of CalPERS in 1997 said to me, they have given up on the country. They are moving all the money out starting in the fall. And I mistakenly thought he meant that they were reallocating the equity investment to the emerging markets, which made perfect sense. That's not, I believe now, what he was referring to. A process started that fall, the beginning of fiscal 1998, where enormous amounts of money just started leaving the federal government. So as of 2015, we had 21 trillion of undocumentable adjustments. A professor at Michigan State University heard me talking about it in 2016 and offered to do a survey of all the accounts for all those years. I had the number up to 12 trillion, and he got it up to 21 trillion. Let me explain how much 21 trillion is. That's $65,000 for every man, woman, and child in America. 65,000. Okay. That does not include what happened during the bailouts. Does anybody remember the financial crisis and the bailouts? That number, according to the Levy Institute, was 29 trillion. So 21 trillion and 29 trillion, and we can debate the precision of these numbers, but that's 50 trillion. That's a lot of money. Okay, so what happened next? We published a big report in 2017 about all the money missing and the fact there was a financial coup d'etat. And the result was that your government, the Senate, the House, Republicans and Democrats, and the Trump White House in October 2018, remember the Kavanaugh hearings? Everybody deeply interested in the sex life of the Supreme Court nominee? Okay, this is what happened while you were watching the sex life of Supreme Court nominee Kavanaugh. They passed an administrative policy called Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board Statement 56. That'll put you to sleep, right? Okay. Has there anybody in this audience ever heard, I call it FASB 56. Anybody ever heard of FASB 56? A few people. Alex is, you're always on the case, you know. Okay, so FASB 56 said, now, under the law, the most supreme law is the Constitution. And then under the Constitution, we have legislation. So legislation that's been passed into law is the second layer. Subject to that legislation, we promulgate regulations. They're the next layer. So you have the Constitution, the law, and then you have the regulation. And then the last layer is administrative policy. Okay? FASB 56 is administrative policy agreed to by the House, the Senate, and the Trump White House, all Democrats, the whole uniparty. Okay? And here's what FASB 56 said. A secret group of people, by a secret process, can withdraw from the finances of the US government, the financial statements, a secret amount of money. And so when you publish the financial statements, you have no idea what it means. And that not only applies to the 24 covered agencies, the main agencies of the federal government, but it also applies when you roll in the national security laws and the classification laws to 150 governmental related agencies and the big defense contractors and banks that do business with the federal government. Now, I was an investment advisor for 10 years. Let me tell you what that means. When you look at the financial statements in the large cap bond and large cap stock market, the treasury market, and for the federal government, you have no idea what those financial statements mean. Because a secret group of people by a secret process could take out whatever they want, and you have no idea what they mean, for both the companies and the government. So that's when I started reading the financial statement. What happened right after FASB 56? The central bankers met in 2019 in Jackson Hole And they did what central bankers do every 80 to 120 years. They agreed on a reset, okay? So we've heard the World Economic Forum call it the Great Reset. Actually, the plan that was reviewed by the central bankers at Jackson Hole in 2019 is called the Going Direct Reset. And if you go to Solari, we have a great wrap up on the Going Direct Reset, and it will describe, I wrote something called State of Our Currency that described how we were coming into a reset, that keeping the currency sort of restocked was going to require a reset. And then we did one on what the Going Direct Reset was and what the plan was. The plan was developed by a group of central bankers working through the BlackRock Investment Institute. And in fact, after it was over, the Fed hired BlackRock to help them institute some of that plan. This is a picture as well of the FASB 56, which is decided as an administrative policy that it can overturn the Constitution. That's litigation ready to happen. So how did they get away with all of this? How can you possibly, oh, and I should mention, during the Going Direct Reset, they injected $5 trillion, okay, directly into the financial system. That's why it's called Going Direct, because normally the Federal Reserve, if it wants to do quantitative easing, will put money in the reserve track, and then the reserve track will end up putting money in the economy. This was unprecedented because they were going direct. So you shut down Main Street, you give your pals on Wall Street $5 trillion, and they get to buy everybody up for cheap, right? It's a plunder plan, right? Okay, so $21 trillion plus $29 trillion plus $5 trillion equals how much? $55 trillion. So I don't want to hear about $39 trillion of debt. That's another scam because, in fact, we could just issue the currency without using debt. So, you know, that's at $39 trillion. Okay, so how did they manage to get away with all of this? Well, I'm going to give you a couple of thoughts about how it happened. Who here has heard me tell the red button story? Okay, so I've told it so many times I decided I'd just play the video. So here's the red button story. The red button. You never want to have an epiphany in the middle of a speech, but I did. In the summer of 2000, I was speaking to a wonderful group of people called Spiritual Frontiers Foundation International. And they have a conference once a year to talk about how they can help evolve our society spiritually. So they're very dedicated, wonderful people. A friend of mine had asked me to give a speech called How the Money Works on Organized Crime. And in the middle of the speech, I was describing the fact that a reporter who was I was doing research for had been told by the Department of Justice that the U.S. economy and financial system launders $500 billion to $1 trillion a year of all dirty money. So I said to this wonderful group of spiritually evolved people, what would happen if we stopped laundering $500 billion to $1 trillion a year of all dirty money? So we had a little interaction, and they said, well, you know, the stock market would go down because that money would leave and go to Hong Kong or Singapore or Zurich, and we'd have trouble financing the government deficit because we would offend the people who control that money and the accumulated capital for many years thereon. And so our government checks might stop or our taxes might go up. So I said, okay, well, let's pretend there's a big red button up here on the lectern. And if you push that button, you can stop all hard narcotics trafficking in your community, your state, your country tomorrow, thus offending the people who control $500 billion to $1 trillion of annual dirty money. And so I said, who here will push the button? And out of 100 people, only one would push the button. And I said to the other 99, why would you not push the button? And they said, we don't want our mutual funds and our IRAs to go down in price. We don't want our government checks to stop, and we don't want our taxes to go up. And so that's what I call the red button problem. And what the Solari mission is about how do we turn the red button green? In other words, how do we make money pushing the red button? Because if we can make money pushing the red button, then we can push the red button. Okay, so at the end of World War II, George Kennan at the State Department said, we have 6% of the people and 50% of the resources, and to keep that going, we're going to drop a lot of bombs. And the American people, Goldwater came along, he said, we're going to have to drop a lot of bombs, and the American people said, oh no, we're good Christians, we don't want to do that. And so Jimmy Carter came along and he shivered in front of the fireplace and he said, we're going to have to cut back. And the American people said, no, we don't want to do that. And the Bushes, who I worked for, came along and said, you know something? Here's your check. You're all good Christians. Don't ask questions. Okay? And that's where we've been. What politicians have been giving us is our check and the story of I am good. But we're coming into a period when that system is now ending. And we're facing what Alistair Cook calls a catharsis. There's a wonderful representative from northern Idaho who said to me once, he said, I really try and enforce the Constitution. He said, a lot of this federal money comes with terms and conditions that violate the Constitution and make us violate the Constitution. He said, but every year, Idaho, we send $1 to Washington, and then every year we get $1.19 back. And every time I try and enforce the Constitution, my constituents say, I'd rather have the 19 cents. Okay? So part of this catharsis is facing how the money works. Another thing that we're dealing with is what I call mirror warfare. If you come to Solari, we have a mountain of information about mind control or entrainment technology. I started to publish about this when I was an investment advisor, and I found entrainment technology and subliminal programming being used to market fraudulent investments to clients. And finally, I had to start publishing about it because I needed to understand it exists. We have a great series at Solari also on cognitive liberty, and I recommend it to you. It's very important to protect yourself from this technology, whether it's coming through TVs or smartphones or whatever, but you need to know it exists. So one of the things that caused us to not do something about it was the red button problem, but part of it was entrainment. I threw out my TV in 1984 because I was on Wall Street. I heard 2 billionaire types talking about entrainment technology and subliminal programming that was rolling out on TV. It scared me to death. And I've never had a TV since then. I had a decorator who bought one for me when I was in the administration. She said, Fitz, you can't work for the government and not have a TV. But I gave it away as soon as I left. Okay, another thing we didn't notice is throughout our lives, we've been seeing the train tracks of digital control built around us. So we've seen digital assets, digital transport, smart homes, driverless cars, QR codes, barcodes, digital elections, AI, digital IDs, smartphones. Each piece of this seems really convenient. And the problem is when you synthesize it together, it's like putting up 3 sides of a corral around a herd. When the fourth corral or the fourth fence clicks in, suddenly we're in a whole new world. And I want to talk about what that fourth line looks for. The first thing I do want to say, in the summer of 2024, I have a show every week on the Solari Report called Money and Markets. And I said to John Titus on Money and Markets, mark my words, the bankers, this was June 2024, the bankers have decided to put Trump in and use him to get the final pieces of the control grid. The conservatives are going to use election fraud and immigration and child online safety, and these other ruses, basically to force everybody into the digital ID they tried to get with vaccine certificates and didn't get to it. So as soon as the administration started, to my shock and amazement, they went at lightning speed to build the digital control grid, particularly the data centers. And the blizzard of actions were coming so fast and furious that I started to have to keep a list just to remember them. And finally, we put up a collection that we update every week. It's called the Fast Approaching Digital Control Grid at the Solari Report. And you can see the updated list to see what's coming together. Okay, so where is this all going? Where's the financial coup going? Our government in the United States is a balance of power between the bankers and the people's representatives. Since 1913, the Federal Reserve and the bankers, so the Federal Reserve is essentially, the train tracks are run by 12 private banks, which are privately owned by the banks. They run the financial train tracks, they run the sort of monetary policy. Then we have the people's representatives. We vote for representation. They determine the taxes and how those taxes will be spent, and it's implemented by the executive branch. So you have this balance of power. The bankers run monetary policy, and the people's representatives run fiscal policy. And that's what the revolution was all about. It was taxation with or without representation. Where they want to go is the bankers now want to control fiscal policy. With digital money, they have the technology now to institute control of both monetary and fiscal policy, and that is where they are going. Okay, so let's look at what this looks like. I want to show you a slide here that describes two systems. One is two-lock money, and the other is three-lock money, okay? Two-lock money, when you do a transaction with somebody you're purchasing from, or you do a bank transfer, there are two parties. There's the buyer, the seller, or the sender and receiver, and each of you get to veto that transaction. If I don't want to receive your money, I can veto it. If you don't want to send it, you can veto it. It's a two-lock. Each of us has a lock on the transaction. What is happening now is the development of three-lock money. Now, let me just say, in two-lock transactions, we are seeing more and more financial institutions interrupting or interceding. So we saw the Canadian truckers. That was the financial institutions interrupting two-lock money. So we know banks have know your customer rules, they have money laundering rules, they have sanctions, there are more and more sanctions, and they will sometimes step in and interfere, but from their point of view, it's very cumbersome, expensive to intercede in these ways, but it's intercession in a two-lock system. Where we're going is a three-lock system. And what a three-lock system does is there's the buyer, the seller, and then in the middle, there is a complex dynamic algorithm, which I call Mr. Goebbels' Know Your Transaction Representative, okay? And what that means is that in near real time, if not real time, you can have the equivalent of a social credit system reviewing every transaction and accepting or rejecting it, okay? And that gives you the ability to implement all sorts of rules. So if the pandemic had happened and we said, okay, everybody's locked down, then your money won't work if you leave your house, okay? If you don't take your healthcare mandate, they can turn off your money. So it was very interesting during the first beginning of the Biden administration. Biden nominated somebody for controller of the currency who finally got thrown out because she had a felony, or she had a criminal, I don't know if it was felony or misdemeanor, but she had a record for shoplifting when she was in graduate school, which I'm sure made her perfect for control of the currency. But she published a article in the Vanderbilt Law Review several weeks before she was nominated. And in it, she said the great thing about central bank digital currency, which is a form of CBDC. So programmable money can be issued by the central bank, then it's called central bank digital currency. It can be issued privately, and we're going to talk about what that looks like right now. It's stablecoins and digital tokens in the US. But she said the great thing about programmable money is if you're worried about inflation, if the central bank is worried about inflation, you can just freeze everybody's bank accounts. And that's true. So in 2020, Augustine Carstens, who was at the time the general manager of the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, was speaking on an IMF panel with Jerome Powell, who's the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Okay, who here knows what the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland is? Okay, so the BIS is the central bank of central banks. It has 63 of the most powerful central banks as its member. The New York Fed and the Fed are shareholders. They have been shareholders of the BIS since '94. They were part of the founding of it many decades ago. And BIS is one of those special institutions internationally that has sovereign immunity. It has its own police force. It's above the law. Anyway, so Augustine Carstens is talking on this IMF panel about why he loves central bank digital currencies, aka programmable money. Now, this is a very special clip. It's 59 seconds long, and I was trained and raised to be a central banker. Okay, I was asked to join the Fed as a governor, which I declined, but my whole life I was trained. And one thing you never do if you're a central banker is speak English. You know, you speak pretzel talk. You don't tell people bluntly what's going on. So, you know, people listen to central bankers and they're like, God, I guess I wish I had done better in economics in college because I just didn't understand what he said. You know, so it's very obtuse. This is the first time in my life that I saw a serious senior central banker tell the truth. I fell off my chair and I said to John, who was watching it with me, I said, did you get that? And he said, oh, don't worry, I already got it. We got it. Okay, So here is Augustine Parsons in 59 seconds explaining to you why he loves programmable money.
All our analysis on CBDC, in particular for the use of general use, we tend to establish the equivalence with cash. And there is a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also, we will have the technology to enforce that. Those two issues are extremely important, and that makes a huge difference with respect to what cash is.
We can make the rules centrally and we can enforce them because we have the data centers, the AI, and the technology to do so. Okay, so when Britain was fighting about whether or not they create a digital ID called the Brit card, somebody made this cute little video, and it gives a good sense of what it's like to walk around in that world.
This is a restricted access for Brit card holders only.
I don't have a smartphone. I didn't register for the Brit card. I'm sorry.
Stop right there. You do not have a Brit card. You are under arrest.
You don't have a Brit card? Then I'm afraid we can't offer you treatment. Another large wine, please.
Sorry, hun, your Brit card says you've exceeded your alcohol quota for this week.
You what? You don't have a Brit card? Then I'm afraid you're fired. I'm afraid your Brit card says you have exceeded your carbon footprint for this month and you will not be permitted to purchase any more fuel. I'm sorry, sir. According to your Brit card, you've reached your flight quota and surpassed the government's emissions target. I can't let you on this flight. It looks like you're trying to check out logic, but I'm afraid that book has been withdrawn.
I'm just trying to get home.
This is a map of all the countries where the BIS has partnerships, and they've been running a process around the world with countries all over the world to help bring in CBDC or programmable money. Interestingly enough, there's been a huge pushback in the United States, both at the federal and state level, to stop CBDCs. And the Fed can't do central bank digital currency without authorizing legislation. And they're smart enough to try and to not go for it right now. Instead, what they've decided to do is introduce a privatized version. They have two bills we're going to talk about briefly. One is the Genius Act, which was passed last year, and they're promulgating regulations for it right now. And the second is still under negotiation. It's called the Clarity Act. The stablecoin basically is a way of issuing a crypto which is collateralized by treasury bills. The goal is to issue it globally and attract billions, if not trillions of dollars into the dollar market and into the treasury market, helping to finance the government. And the goal of the Clarity Act is to move all stocks and bonds and assets, ultimately real assets as well, onto distributed ledger where they can be traded with the equivalent of a digital token or crypto. So DTC, which now holds $114 trillion of financial assets, has just announced it's going to do a launch this year of its distributed ledger so that they can trade stocks and bonds. And what that means is they can make the trading of stocks and bonds a 3-lock process instead of a 2-lock process. So it will apply not just to stable coins as a currency, but to the trading of stocks and bonds and ultimately real assets. Okay, so that's the Genius Act. Let me just say a few words about what stable coins look like. Who here is familiar with stable coins? Raise your hand if you, okay. This is important, whether you're interested in owning stable coins or not. It's really important that you familiarize yourself with what's happening. We have a great legislative briefing on stable coins. It's at Solera. You can find it on our YouTube channel. I want you to understand it because depending on how successful this effort is, it could have a dramatic tsunami-like impact on the financial system. So this is a group of developers several years ago talking about what's going to happen with stablecoins.
Speaking of stablecoins and the ability to use them for payments, what's your take there?
Yeah, look, I think if you go, there's 8 billion people on the planet. If you could go to each of those 8 billion people and ask them, hey, you can denominate your wealth in any asset, gold, Apple stock, S&P 500, euros, yen, whatever you want. My suspicion is if you went and asked everyone in the world and they could answer the question without fear of political persecution, I suspect 5 to 7 billion of them would say US dollars. And so it's probably the single largest arbitrage ever in human history is to just get those people what they want. If you think that's what they want, then give it to them. And crypto rails are going to be the mechanism by which you do so. And so I think there's a massive opportunity to get stable coins in the hands of billions of people.
Okay, so does anybody remember when the wall went down in East Berlin? We're all old enough, I think a lot of us to remember that. Okay, so I was at the White House, I was in Washington working in the administration, and everybody's talking about, we're going to have lots of meetings and treatings and organizations. It's going to 10 years to merge East Germany and West Germany together. And that's not what happened. The head of Germany, Hermann Kohl, just announced a sweet premium for the East Germany currency. And literally overnight, everybody in East Germany switched into the Deutschmark and the country was unified through the currency. Okay? The stablecoin effort is going to try and do the same. We're going to try and issue stablecoins through the mobile payment systems and online to everybody in the world and try and get them off their local currency and into dollar stablecoins with that money going into the treasury market. And that's not just going to happen in Ecuador and Bolivia and all around the world. It's going to happen on Main Street here. And one of the issues is it going to suck money out of the banking system in a way that's going to hurt the tax base and the local GNP? If all that money's going in the treasury market instead of financing businesses on Main Street, it's going to dramatically shift what's happening. And in fact, local investment, I think, is going to become a real opportunity. So let's keep going. Okay, the Clarity Act, as I said, still hasn't passed yet. And this, in terms of total dollars, is probably bigger than stablecoins, because they're talking about taking $114 trillion of stocks and bonds and putting it on a distributed ledger and trading it with using crypto. And there's many discussions of exactly how this is going to work, but this could be pretty interesting to give you a sense. Coinbase has come out and said early this year, and I don't know if they've started, but they probably have, they're going to start trading a couple of the big stocks as crypto perpetuals. And they're offering, are you ready for this? 20 times margin. And these markets are going to trade 24/7. So I always tell people, if you think you've seen the biggest bubble yet, my guess is we're working up to an even bigger one. Okay, so I want to talk about, I showed you all the different pieces of the digital control grid. There are 3 parts of the digital control grid that you need to understand. The first and most important to me is programmable money. This is what Valeri is working to put guardrails up to stop programmable money from interfering with your financial freedom. It depends on a digital ID. One of the reasons we've fought so hard against digital IDs is, and there are many excuses used to justify digital IDs, whether it's online safety or vaccinations or election fraud or immigration. Don't believe it. We had tight borders before we had digital technology. We don't need digital IDs. The reason they want a digital ID is you need a high quality global interoperable digital ID to do programmable money and put into place that third lock. Okay? You need digital IDs for the third lock. The last thing you need is you need a hardware infrastructure. And this is what's been happening in America, because now more and more people can see that hardware infrastructure. So we can see the flock cameras. Does everybody know about flock cameras? We can see the flock cameras. We can see the drones overhead. We can see the huge data centers. Utah just approved a data center that's 63 miles wide or long, and they estimate at full capacity is going to use 3 times more energy than the entire state of Utah does currently. Okay, if you look at the numbers, America has approximately 4,500 data centers. Guess how many China has? About 368, I think. So we have more than 10 times China, even though our population is much less. And I suspect that's because one of the things they want to do with those data centers is they want to collect data and put that third lock, not just on American citizens, but everybody who's got one of those stable coins or is trading one of those digital tokens worldwide. Okay? Now, what's interesting is the more the hardware becomes present, the more people are starting to see it and object and push back, particularly the young people. They don't want to be part of this. Okay, so if you notice, we're in the middle of a war. Excuse me, that's not what they call it. They call it an excursion. So, but, and you can see an article about this. There are energy production, refining, and transportation facilities all around the world that are being sabotaged, not just in the Ukraine and Middle East, as well as trade routes being bottlenecked. And you can read all about it at the piece we have at Solari. What you need to know is this has the potential to have a dramatic impact on the economy. The Wall Street Journal just announced today inflation is up to 3.8%. Actually, it's much higher than that, but they're admitting that it's going up. And we could be faced with real energy rations and real hiccups in the supply chain. Our theme for Money and Markets this week is brace for impact. The impact of this has been softened since February 28th when this started by many countries, including the United States, allowing huge amounts of oil out of their surplus and reserve. But we're coming to a point where that's going to have to stop. And when that does, it's going to have a dramatic impact. So I want you to brace for impact. And that's part of what is putting enormous incentives on the leadership to get that control grid in place. I want to show you the next video. People always say, you know, we have a debt problem in the United States, we're bankrupt. That's just not true. We have $39 trillion of debt. That debt was issued to issue currency. We didn't have to do it. We could have issued it without that. But if you look at how much wealth we have as a nation, just on the federal balance sheet, they've stolen as much as you could steal probably with financial assets. But we have an enormous amount of real assets on the balance sheet. And I want to show you this video of the Secretary of Commerce before the administration started talking about how much it's worth.
What is the balance sheet of the United States of America? What's everything we own and everything we have? I think it's worth $500 trillion. So then you say, okay, Howard, can you make 0.25% on it? Right now, if all of your assets are a giant mountain of, you know, palladium and gold and you can't move it and you have to just look at it and go, oh, that's so pretty. That's not going to help us. But we have land and we have minerals. So if we have 500 trillion and we can make 0.25%, if you give us a $500 trillion asset, can you make $1 trillion off of it? All right.
Hopefully.
I'm going to rename that famous department. We just called it. We called it the Department of the Interior. Let's give it the real name. The Department of all the Land and Mineral Rights of the United States of America. But the value, the asset value of the United States of America, $500 trillion, the addressable market. Mm-hmm. Can Elon Musk and I come up with 0.25%, $1.25 trillion of revenues? And the answer is.
So one of the reasons I'm so opposed to allowing a control grid to lock into place is those $500 trillion of assets are in play. If you look at what's happening in Gaza, they're taking people's land and giving them a digital token, right? And don't think they wouldn't try it here if they could. What can you and I do? And what I have to say is there is so much we can do. You know, I'm constantly saying to people, get off the couch, because I'm seeing amazing people doing a lot. So if you look at what Alex Meyer and Jane are doing, round of applause. I mean, Alex is simply, everybody else in the health freedom world just about has given up on California. Alex Meyer is standing there and charging. So this is the year of the fire horse. I told Alex, you are a fire horse, girl. So there's so much you can do, but everybody's different and you have to do what your skills and interests lead you to do. But let me talk about some of those things. The first thing you can do is you can pray. Some people prefer meditation. You decide what you can do. I have seen spiritual warriors shift political situations radically, okay? It really, really works. I can tell you the stories. Transparency is important. You know, the criminals like the dark, and there's a lot we can do to bring transparency. I'm going to talk about this. The key to not allowing a digital control grid to go into place is to keep cash and analog systems alive. And more people are beginning to realize this. The Scandinavian central banks led the charge to end cash. And literally 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, after the floods in East Tennessee and Western North Carolina, they came out and said, you know, the electricity doesn't always work and we need cash. You know, we need cash for these worst cases. So cash is rolling back. What we're working on at Solari is passing state legislation to stop programmable money, and we're working and supporting teams of people who are trying to stop the digital IDs and local infrastructure. There is a huge amount that states can do. For heaven's sakes, stop financing and supporting the people who are doing this. If you're banking with the banks that did the financial crisis, I don't know what to say, but get yourself a banker you deserve. Support your sheriff, city council, state reps. Get to know them. This is not going to be decided in the White House. This is going to be decided by your sheriffs, by your AG, by your governors, and by the state legislatures. That's where we have to take the fight. You know, the way they control the federal credit is one county at a time, 3,100 counties. And there is so much you can do in local politics. Stop investing in the control grid. I'll bet you right now, if I rolled up every IRA and 401k in this place, you are putting the majority of your money into financing the control grid and the data centers. And, you know, part of that process I call coming clean, and I'm going to point you to something. Here's how change starts. One of my favorite people is a Swiss doctor, and he says, the currency of the future will be relationships of trust. The currency of the future will be relationships of trust. Building forward, building a future requires working with the people you can trust. And that's why I say everybody's networks are different, everybody's skills are different. But when you decide to get off the couch and take action, you want to figure out, okay, who can I trust and what can I get done with the people I trust? We're just about to publish a big wrap-up called Mr. Global in Your Street, and it's all about how business people and enterprises and places can get together and start to turn things around locally. You want to act locally. That's where you're going to build resilience on energy, on food, on all those other things. You're in California, you still have wonderful food here. Okay, so who's going to do all this building? We have a program at Solari called the Young Builders, and the idea is to take our curriculum in building wealth and work with young people who want to learn how to be successful in building great families and building enterprise. And it's very successful, but what I will tell you is I've never been more impressed with a group of people than the people we have in our Young Builders course, and we're taking in a new class this summer. There are millions of great young people out there ready to build a future if we will support them. But the more experienced generations and the generations with a little bit of capital, they're our army and we need to get behind them. So search out, particularly in your family, if you have really great young people in your family or extended family, look for them. So on Solari, every week we have something called Solari Heroes. We have a Hero of the Week and then we have a Hero of the Year. Our Hero of the Year in 2024 was Congressman Thomas Massey. Absolutely, round of applause. I was amazed when I left the establishment. I left the establishment in 1998 and I said, the neocons are going to get control of this government and kill us all. And that's exactly what happened. And meantime, the worms are just publishing articles complaining that things aren't working. I was like, yeah, thank you. But what I discovered is there were thousands of great leaders working hard for all of us in the State House, on the City Council, mayors, but we weren't honoring them and we weren't supporting them. And I can't tell you how many great leaders I've seen go down in this country because they're not getting support. And it's really culminated now with the primary for Thomas Massey in Kentucky. On May 19th, I'm tapped out. I've given him everything I can give unless I go to the PAC. And this is an amazing fight because he's got $0 from AIPAC and his opponent who refuses to debate him or literally show up on the campaign trail has gotten $9 billion from AIPAC and much more from that group in their PAC. And the question is, Can oligarchs buy an election with lies and no candidate? This will be the test. But literally, who here knows Tiffany Cianci? She's a wonderful activist fighting private equity. She's gone down to Kentucky for the last 19 decades to get out the young vote. And so we've got to support our heroes. Pick out a leader in California, in your community, in your activation networks, in your businesses, whatever, in your family. Pick out a leader and just ask them, what can I do to help? Because if we start supporting leaders, it's going to make an enormous difference. Okay, we work a lot with state governments. We published a big study. It's up on the Solari report. You can read it on how to stop the coup. This is everything a state legislator can do to protect financial freedom. There's a lot. We have a website for financial transaction freedom. We have briefings for legislators and activists every month. You can get briefings on stablecoins. You can get briefings on the Clarity Act, all the different issues. And we have 2 model legislations that we focus on. Of all the things state legislators can do, we said we have to focus. One is on protecting cash and keeping cash alive through state legislation and state action, and the other is programmable money. We need to put guardrails on programmable money. We need to say, fine, issue your stable coins and issue your digital tokens, but you can't use them to compromise fundamental human rights and constitutional rights. And you can't force somebody to do a transaction with programmable money. Your grocery store can't say the only way you can buy food is with programmable money, including programmable money that compromises your constitutional rights. So they have to give you a 2-lock alternative. Okay, so the idea is put up guardrails. We tried to get legislation passed in 3 states this last year. Utah passed one. We got very close in Idaho. We're going to come back and we hope Idaho passes it. We got absolutely slaughtered in Tennessee, but we learned a lot about why the banks and credit unions are embracing 3-lock money. And so if you're on a credit union board or a community bank board, talk to your bankers and tell them, you don't want 3-lock money. Okay, so I'm going to send you to a publication we have on Solari. You can print it out, you can copy it, you can spread it around. It's totally public. It's called Coming Clean. And it's the 24 steps you can take to get the bad guys out of your mind, get them out of your home, get them out of your body, get them out of your pocketbook, just get them out. I used to have a healthcare practitioner who would explain to me how a tapeworm worked in your body. She said, the way a tapeworm worked is it injected into you a chemical that made you crave what was good for the tapeworm and bad for you. That's the media, right? It causes you to want what's good for the tapeworm. So everybody knows what you do if you have a tapeworm. You need to detox, right? Here's the magic trick. The more you detox the financial tapeworm out of your life, the stronger you get and the weaker the tapeworm gets. We're the one that is feeding the tapeworm with where we purchase, where we bank, where we invest our money, who we admire, who we support. If I sit down, I don't mean to offend you if you work at Goldman Sachs. I used to work at Goldman Sachs, but if I sit down and somebody says I work at Goldman Sachs, I say, excuse me, I'm moving. Okay, no, it's good old-fashioned sunning. Does all the women remember Lysistrata, right? No sex for the bad guys, right? That's how it worked. Okay, coming clean, and I recommend it. And remember, the important thing when you come clean is do what makes you stronger. Our goal here is to make you stronger in a way that makes the central powers weaker. Okay, so I'm going to come back to this again. Use cash. Use cash. We started with Cash Friday. Now it's cash every day. We have a great hat at Solari called Make Cash Great Again. Okay, but not only use cash, but when somebody says we don't take cash, challenge them. Say you want to take cash. If I come into a community and I spend $100 and it's a digital transaction, or let's say it's a credit card, after 100 transactions, it's all gone. If I spend $100 in cash, after 100 transactions, there's still $100 circulating around the community. If you look at how much money financial fees take out of communities, it's unbelievable. It's extraordinary. And if the client population, if the customers will support and support cash, that's a difference to a small business of 1 or 2%, which can be the difference between a profit and a loss. That can be an extraordinary amount of money. So use cash. And frankly, we are going into a period of potentially very high inflation that could turn into, a deflation and a depressionary deflation. There's nothing like cash to budget. I don't know if you've bought a big ticket item with cash and suddenly you're looking at all the cash and saying, wait a minute, do I really want to do this? So use cash, have cash. I can't tell you how many people I know around the world have been in a situation where the electricity went down. I have a generator. I live in an area where the electricity always goes down. If you don't have cash, I'll never forget when the cyclones hit New Zealand, and it's about 5 or 6 years ago, the governor of the central bank stood up and said, thank God we had cash because there was no electricity. And if we had that cash, the whole financial system would shut down. And I said to Titus on Money and Markets, I guess he did not get the memo. He's going to be in trouble with the BIS guys. Okay, community. If we're going to be resilient in this kind of cathartic environment, we need to be resilient in terms of food. We need to be resilient in terms of energy. We need to be resilient in terms of people who can help us with healthcare, or people who can help us with food, or people who can help us with energy. And that comes from community. And community is from coming out to organizations like this, which is why I'm so glad to see you here. Okay, now before we go to questions and answers, I just want to say one thing. I talked about Thomas Massey and heroes. I just want to ask you, because I can't tell you how much good it does if you will really support the people who support you. So I just want to ask you, is Court Skinner in the audience if you are a stand-up Court? Let's see if he made it. Okay. Court Skinner, I'm going to tell you, Court Skinner is one of my favorite people in the world. He's from this area. I recommend him to you highly. When I litigated against the federal government, the Department of Justice, for many years, I had a real hacking problem. The life expectancy of one of my laptops was short. In the last year before I settled the litigation, the life expectancy of my laptops was 29 days. Okay? And Court Skinner he was a big guy in Silicon Valley, ran research at National Semiconductor, but when he retired, he created a not-for-profit called Computers R Us, and he used to take used parts and slap them together and FedEx me a new laptop every 29 days. And Court Skinner kept me online for a year, he sent me 13 FedEx laptops. And they were all Linux, they were all open source, but they could still destroy them in 29 days. Court never complained, and he did it as a volunteer. So I would like you to stand up and take a bow, Court. So that's how you support people. That was one action, but I can't imagine what would have happened to me. I would never have gotten the settlement because I wouldn't have been able to communicate with my lawyers. I think that was the goal. There are two other leaders here you can absolutely support, and one is Jane and one is Alex. So I would just ask that they stand up and take a bow. What they do is, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of hard work. One of my favorite quotes from John Rappaport is he says, hopelessness is an op and it's planet-wide. Okay, and the hardest thing in the world to do is to do what they do and never give in to that op. And I've never seen them do it. They're ferocious and fearsome. So I would just ask another great round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to address you today.
Catherine, are there any honest banks?
Yes.
How do we find them?
So at Solari, there is a 4-part series called How to Build a Great Relationship with a Bank. And
excuse me, your voices are actually carrying up here. I know you're excited and talking to each other, but if you could keep your voices down until Catherine's done.
And for many years, my general counsel and I got so many questions about how to find a great bank, and we had articles and everything else. We finally decided, okay, we're going to sit down and do 4 60-minute parts to describe all the things you do to due diligence, find a bank, build a relationship, and transfer your accounts in a very prudent, responsible way. There are so many great banks and so many great bankers in the country. It's unbelievable. You can't believe anybody would bank at the people who did the financial crisis when they could bank at a great. I have the greatest bank in the world as far as I'm concerned. So, but find one where you are.
Okay, you talked about the three states that are pushing back and using your guidance. What is the best piece of legislation you've seen so far to push back against centralized money?
So if you go to Solari and you go to our Financial Transaction Freedom website, we have a section called Model Legislation, and you can download the programmable money legislation. And as we're working through the legislative process, we keep it updated. We have briefings on the programmable money legislation at that website. You can sign up to get newsletters and we will keep you posted. But you can download a copy of that model legislation and take it to your state representative and senator and ask them to start passing it.
Okay. And by the way, if anyone knows where finds that missing 21 trillion, if you could just give it to Anne Marie in the back where the lost and found is, that would be very, very helpful. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Anne Marie. Okay, we have a lot of questions from the audience, and I'm excited about this. Talk about the surtax that's being used in several states. Is that the next weapon to grab new money or affluence?
I don't know a lot about that. There are so many ways of grabbing money by inflating property taxes or putting, issuing debt off balance sheet that can come back around and bite the taxpayer. There are thousands of those sort of strategies. We have a great Solari report called Mapping Your Financial Ecosystem. And I strongly recommend to anybody who wants to take the time to understand their local finances. There is a wealth of information available about your local finances, and you'd be amazed what can happen if you start taking an interest. During the pandemic, we had a couple of great subscribers who wanted to get rid of the school board. And so what they decided to do, since they couldn't get rid of the school board, is to audit their books and records. And then they got the dirt on them, and then they got rid of their school board.
Well, there's an idea. I know a couple of people who might know something about school boards. Yeah. All right. Catherine, I'm going to have you look towards the camera because when the recording comes out and all the rest of the people get to hear this, they'll see your face instead of the side of it. But let's talk about some real practical things. One of our audience members wants to know if there's a difference between using an ATM card and a credit card, and is it a good idea to pay off pay off a home using retirement funds to avoid being locked out of some kind of a mortgage situation?
Okay, so I prefer to use, for some situations, I prefer to use a credit card. Some I prefer to use a debit card. So when you're renting a car, a lot of rental cars will not take a debit card. The advantage of a debit card, of course, is it comes straight off your account. It's a little bit like cash. The problem is you have to be very careful about fraud. So if you use a debit card, I strongly recommend you put a limit on it with your bank and just make sure, nobody can do anything over the limit. I've paid off my mortgage because I didn't want to think about it anymore. Whether or not you take money out of a 401k or IRA has a lot to do with what the fee is, what your other finances are. And so I don't know how to answer that question without understanding the unique characteristics of each person. But, if you've got to pay big taxes and fees to get it out, to pay down your mortgage, in many cases, don't get scared into having to do that. Unless you see the government start to change the policies about 401ks and IRAs in a way that's very disturbing, and then you might want to consider it. But I'd be careful about paying too much in taxes.
Okay. Gosh, we have such great questions. I know you all are all, as am I, really, really interested to hear what Catherine says about this because her experience is so vast. So I'm going to just shoot, if you're up for it, Catherine, I'm going to shoot a bunch of them at you. What is the difference, one of our members wants to know, between a distributive ledger and a blockchain?
Oh, we have to ask Court that question. He helped me do a due diligence on blockchain, but on Bitcoin. But my understanding is it's very similar. Is that true, Court? Yep. Yeah.
Very similar. Okay. And what about precious metals? What role do they play in your financial?
I'm precious metals, and I always say, always have enough gold to bribe the border guards. So I'll never forget when I was a little girl, my mother had a wonderful friend who'd escaped Germany right before the Nazis came after her family. and they had gold buried in the backyard and they couldn't find it. And then finally they found it and they heard the clinking of the coins against the metal box and they knew they would be free. And, so it was a very poignant story. Anyway, I love precious metals. And if we're coming into a period, there's a wonderful article by an Australian investor called Craig Tyndale called The Hard Bifurcation. And I recommend it to you. And what it describes is we've been in an economy where you could solve your supply needs by paying more or using money. And now we're talking about the economy breaking down. It's part of deglobalization where money can't solve the problem anymore. If you don't have fresh food, you can't necessarily get it by going to the grocery store, where it's all GMO. So there's a breakdown between, the ability of money to get you what you need, and you have to get much more savvy about getting what you need. So part of this is national security issues where, for example, we need rare earth minerals and we can't get the supply we want from China and we're dependent on them for refining. But meantime, we're in the middle of having a war with them. So you're seeing this breakdown, and in that environment, the value of real assets is rising. So we're in one way to describe it is a bull market for commodities. And precious metals are the most understandable and easy real asset for many people to buy. Just be sure if this is an unregulated market, and there are many dealers who are not reliable in this market, so you have to be very careful. We have a great third quarter 2024 equity overview where we go through all of our links on precious metals. You need to get yourself a very good education on precious metals before you start to invest or mess with them. And the most important thing you need to know is, why are you buying it? Are you buying it as central bank insurance? Are you buying it for the worst case? Or are you buying it for investment? And we have a lot of material to help you understand which is which. And the most important thing is where you're going to put it. Don't laugh. I have the number one way I've seen people lose money on precious metals is they forget where they put it. No, really. They forget where they put it. They put the Krugerrands in the sock, and then they gave the sock to the Salvation Army and out go the Krugerrands. No, really. I had a former client who had an enormous amount of 90% silver worth a great deal of money in her basement. The plumber comes over, she forgets it's down there, and 3 months later she checks and it's gone. Right. So you need to know where you're going to put it, and you need to have thought through the issues. So, if you think it's dangerous to put it in your bank deposit, wait do you see some of your neighbors? Okay. So you really need to think through, what are the risk issues? Where do you put it? What do you want it for and how? So I strongly recommend, get that third quarter 2024 equity overview, go through all the links, get yourself a good education. The other thing I will tell you is that for 10 years, I was an investment advisor, and one of the greatest rules I discovered was the following, and that is, you can trick a man or you can trick a woman, but it's very hard to trick a man and woman working together. So if you're a couple, I strongly recommend, if you're going to do precious metals, you learn about it together, you talk about it together, you figure it out together, and when you finally find a dealer you want to use, you make sure they're reputable, they get good recommendations, and always get prices from multiple dealers. Shop around. Okay?
I think we should listen to you, Catherine, because you're very effective at building teams, and I suspect that was part of the secret to that. Golly. Well, if you're talking about what we're going to do with our most precious assets and where we're going to keep them, you just said relationships really are the most precious, and I don't really want to bury any of you. So,
Tell one of those stories.
Please.
Okay. Who has heard me talk about the People Bank? Okay. So I litigated with the Department of Justice for 11 years, and it was right. If you've seen the movie Enemy of the State, it was right out of, I played Will Smith in real life. They falsified evidence. They broke into my house. They ran my car off the road. It's the whole scene. Okay. When it started, I was a very wealthy, successful person. And they came after me, and a lot of it was, designed to destroy my finances. So cut off my credit, destroy my reputation, make me spend millions of dollars on subpoena compliance and different litigation processes. At the time, I had a wealthy uncle, and I sold him my family farmland. And I warned him when I sold him my family farmland, the Department of Justice may come after you if you help me. He said, don't worry, I'm not afraid of it. And sure enough, they called and said, your niece is a criminal, you shouldn't help her. And he said, well, I love my niece, I think she's okay. And they said, well, we want the finances on the family farm. He said, I'm happy to send them to you. Just send me a letter asking me for the finances so I can have my lawyer check it. And it's all on the up and up. And instead of mailing him a letter, as they had promised, they showed up with 3 FBI guys and a HUD IG guy at his home in Portsmouth, New Hampshire at 9:00 at night. So my family had a conference call the next day. Should we all drop her? Because if we don't drop her, they'll come after us too, if we help her. So my uncle, who was a really stand-up guy, said, you know something? She has always helped us. I made a lot of money. I was very good at making money. Whenever anybody in my family or friends needed money, I always went the money or gave them the money. I was just very generous. And, my uncle, among other things, if I hadn't done it, they would have come to him because he was the other rich guy in the family. So he said, she's always helped us. So I'm going to help her. I'm not going to walk. I'm going to help her. And over the next, I counted when it was all said and done, I counted up how much I had lent or given. And I had lent or given to people $250,000 as of the time the litigation started. Over the next 11 years, people gifted or repaid back, and I counted it up at the end, exactly $250,000. And what I will tell you is I would never have made it without that $250,000. I would never have made it. I couldn't have made it. And what was amazing is we won the litigation, we got a big settlement, and my CPA said to me, we'd had a 401k, I had $500,000 in 401k that I'd had to cash out and use for subpoena compliance. And she said, let's fund up the 401k. I said, nope, I am never going into business with the government again. I'm taking that $500,000 and I am bonusing it out or gifting it out or lending it out on the People Bank because that is the only bank I trust. Okay? And what I will tell you is the People Bank does not have 3-lock money. Okay? So now, but you can't put money out in the People Bank unless it's people you really, really, really can trust. And the best way to have people in your life you really, really can trust, you know what that is? You be really, really, really trustworthy. Okay? That's the People Bank.
Very sound advice. And I think you answered one of the questions, which is why are whistleblowers being locked out of their homes? Sounds like that's what happened to you. Catherine, what was that like when you found yourself going from the very higher echelons of the inside to sort of maybe not being invited to brunch in Washington anymore? How does that inform who you are today?
So, I was one of those people who always thought it was better to make a quickie deal than to fight. And, because I didn't have a very high opinion of the litigation process. So, but what happened to me was they had broken all the rules, not just the laws, but sort of the informal rules. And I decided, look, if you can steal my money whenever you want, in a lawless way, I'm not going to go back into investment banking on that basis. That's a quicksand. And I absolutely believed if you look at what the neocons and the leadership was doing, they were going to destroy the country. So I wanted no part of it. I wanted to be part of something I could be proud of. And so I said, I'm going to go into the wilderness and see what I can find and see what I can do. And I knew that would take many years and a long time. And I just felt that I had to build my life on something real. And if you look at where they were going, I was sure they were going to fail. So for me, it was certainly a very difficult journey, and it was a very challenging journey. At the same time, you were building your life on something that had a future, whereas I was convinced what they were doing, what the establishment was doing in Washington was going to fail, and that's what we're watching now. We're watching the failure. And all I can say, as I watch it, it's very, very painful for me to watch it, but all I can say is thank God I didn't stay in there and make money on the failure. So I'm happy. There's a great line in the opening of the Course in Miracles that says, nothing real can be lost, nothing unreal is real. And I discovered a lot of my life was unreal. So I changed, and now my life is very real.
Sounds like some good advice for America. How safe are U.S. savings bonds?
You know, I think I owned a savings bond when I was a kid. You know,
There might be a kid.
my grandfather gave me some.
Yeah, we all have some from a long time ago, right?
Yeah, so I don't pay a lot of attention to savings bonds. As you can imagine, I don't want to invest money in U.S. government securities.
Yeah. Let's talk about the president's, you mentioned this earlier privately. So one of our audience members wants to know when we'll have constitutional money and we'll get rid of the central bank. Who tried to do that? Tell the story of what has happened so far to those guys.
So I've had this back and forth with Thomas Massey. I was sitting at Polyface Farm. Thomas was talking, and he said, you know, we should cancel the Fed. And then he looked at me and he said, after we get Catherine's 21 trillion back. So don't cancel the Fed until you get the money back. Just do me a favor. So what I always tell people, the best currencies historically have been fiat currencies that are not debt-based. The problem in the US dollar, among other things, is not that it's a fiat currency. Fiat currencies can be excellent. The problem is you have a secret governance system. You don't have the transparency you're supposed to have under the law, and it's debt-based. Those are the problems. A properly managed and governed debt-based fiat currency will work much better than a gold standard. Now, I love gold. There's plenty of room for gold in the monetary system, so I'm not saying that's true. So, but it's very important before you get rid of the Fed that you understand where you're going. And the problem is not the Fed. Number one, the problem is the secret governance system. And of course, that's very hard for people to organize and do something about. But that's what we have to bring transparency, and that's what we have to do something about. A lot of times, the financial system is just a portion of the governance system. So you have a governance system, and the financial system is a portion of what that governance system uses to run things and to allocate resources. Many times you'll hear people talking about reforming the financial system, and they're simply helping Mr. Global and the secret governance system get to where they want to go. Don't fall in that trap. Okay, so start with the secret governance system and how we're going to deal with that before you jump into quick fixes on the, killing the Fed, and you're going to end up in a worse place. If you end up with programmable money on everything and no Fed, you're going to end up in a worse place.
So, Catherine, a lot of people ask, there's somebody here tonight asked, but people often say, aren't they rich enough? Like, what is the end goal? What do they want with all this theft?
Total control. So the thing to understand about the people who run things, in my experience, is that they are risk managers. So they're not looking to make money. That's not their goal. Now, they will set incentive systems. So when they say, let's go to Rome, they say, okay, the way we're going to go to Rome is we're going to set up the incentive so everybody makes money going to Rome, and then everybody will take us to Rome. And so sort of middle management is organized to make money at wherever they want to go. But the guys at the top are very much risk managers. And they believe, that it's really important to turn the aircraft carrier before you hit the iceberg. And what they came to believe, and you would hear this throughout the 90s, is you just can't trust the general population to understand the risk and turn the aircraft carrier before you hit the iceberg. Now, I disagree with that, which is why I was working on place-based economics, because I think there is a way to do it and still have a lot of democratic process. And if you look at how the economy works, we are spending so much money instituting central control that it's so wealth destroying. If there is any little magic secret I discovered in sort of deep diving the economy, what I discovered is the cost of tyranny is so unbelievably wasteful and expensive. And if we were free to run the society in a way that was optimized the wealth, I'm telling you, the wealth could be phenomenal, especially with all the new technology that I didn't even know about in the 90s. But they don't trust the general population to risk manage. And since their way of dealing with that is to dumb the population down and sort of cut them out of the process and cut them out of sort of market economics. And the more they do that, the more they don't respect us, the more we don't respect them. And so you really have a downward cycle.
Could you talk a little bit about the role of gambling and drugs, et cetera, in all of that?
So the greatest way to control people is to get them addicted to something. And there is literally, if I want to depopulate a people and pull their political power from them, get everyone addicted to something. And there's so many possibilities between drugs, alcohol, food, sugar, porn, sports, gambling, on and on and on. And I showed you what we do on neurowarfare and cognitive liberty. A lot of that stuff is marketed with entrainment technology and subliminal programming. So you're dealing with very, very high-tech stuff.
Did you all notice that this whole sports gambling thing come in as though it just completely normalized gambling? I don't know how there's ever going to be a fair sporting event again. It just seems ludicrous to me that people can believe anything's real now.
Right.
And you can bet on anything, right?
Less than 1% of the accounts are making the most of the profit. It's really the professionals who are in there with big analytics who are creaming off the rest of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So
when you talk about all these addictions, you're really talking about, Catherine, a spiritual warfare for the country.
So
a spiritual healing in a way is what you're calling for, to kind of end our deep relationship with our vices and our weaknesses and step into truth.
Right. So I would say this: we are the target of what I call the great poisoning, which is made up of many different things. It's slow, it's steady, a deterioration in the food supply, the aluminum spray overhead, the fluoride in the water, all these different things, the pharmaceuticals. And that in combination is weakening people. At the same time, they're being marketed with all these different addictions. And I think what's really important is the families that I know that have recognized that this is happening and then said, something, we are going to protect ourselves, and who have shifted their life. They've turned off all the different mediums that bring neurowarfare into their minds. And they've completely redone where they live, how they live. They're unbelievably healthy. They're unbelievably happy. They just got the whole tapeworm out of their body. Do you know what I mean? And so it can be done, but you won't do it unless you understand that this is first and foremost, I agree with you, it's a spiritual war. But we are the target of a depopulation, and it can be outwitted, but not unless you face it and see what it is and really work both individually and collectively to outwit it.
What do you think is going to happen when the new Fed chair steps in? Nothing? Something?
So it's interesting because Warsh was one of the guys who approved that $29 trillion of bailout. So I'm assuming he's going to be a member in good standing of the plunder team. But he has traditionally been conservative when it comes to using interest rates to fight inflation and to, promote conservative policies. And if you look at what's going on, I don't know how he's going to do that with really angering the president. So he's been brought in to make things a lot more looser than Powell ran them. So it's going to be very interesting to see what he does. And I don't know if he's going to follow what he said for his career, or he's going to go back to being, the bailout guy who gives out free money. I don't know.
We don't know. We'll see very shortly.
He's very tech friendly, and he's very friendly to the stablecoin, crypto, digital asset crowd. So he's going to be somebody who's going to be on board for putting into place that three-lock money.
Have there been any successful lawsuits? What about the three-lock system? Has that been challenged in court? And there's a question from the audience, another legal question about the lawsuit against Yosemite National Park for refusing to allow entrance with cash. Have lawsuits been useful at all here?
So Ray Flores, I think, brought the Yellowstone case, and I don't know where it stands now. It was a very great lawsuit to bring. One of my favorite efforts as a group in Switzerland is trying to get a referendum passed nationally for the right to have a non-digital life. And that what they're doing in Yosemite is sort of part of that. What was the first question?
Any challenges with the three-lock system, legal challenges?
Not that I've seen. There are a lot of challenges on debanking laws or using terms and conditions to privately constrict people's use of stablecoins. So I've seen lawsuits of intercession on the two-lock money, but I've yet to see anything on the three-lock money because it's really not in place yet. It's just being planned.
Is there a voice or a campaign that you think is most effective to get us away from digital money? Do you see anything bubbling up that is sexy?
So we have, if you come to our financial transaction freedom website, we have a section called Team Cash that's run by Susan Luchas, who was Hero of the Year last year on the Slayer Report. She runs Team Cash. We have interviews on Team Cash. We have all sorts of stuff on Cash. We're just about to publish a new big article of Cash. And of course, the mandated, we're trying to pass legislation at the state to protect Cash. But if you're interested in Cash, I would go find Susan Luchas online.
Does she have T-shirts, Team Cash T-shirts?
No, but
Because I think we could sell those here. I think.
right, and you can make them too. So we tell everybody just take our stuff and make it yourself.
Go for it. All right, just a couple more, Catherine. I want to. It's hard for me to say this without spitting up a little bit in my mouth. But what about the threat or the? I don't know. I call it a threat, but I guess somebody would think it was fabulous of universal basic income. What would that do?
So that would buy everybody into the three-lock system. Sometimes I used to hear sort of the patriot crowd say, oh, they're going to round us up and put us in camps. No, they're not. They're just going to ensure you make so much profits on your crypto that they get you in the honey trap. Do you know what I mean? So now part of the universal basic income is organizing the money. Like if you pull all the money into the treasury market and pull it out of the local economy, that's how you destroy the jobs. And then people need to get, on the dole. So they're trying to centralize the money and get us on the dole. Go look at a movie. So we have a movie of the week on the Slayer Report. One of the latest movies is called Shillings from Heaven, about a mayor in Australia. It's an old Austrian movie about the mayor who created a work certificate program to basically get the economy going again. And I hate to say this, at the height of the Great Depression, there were 3,100 counties in America and 3,100 community currencies. We don't need a universal basic income. We can make our own money. And at that point, I'd much rather do work certificates and community currencies and build our own resilient economies than, ever get on the federal dole, because they will use that literally to destroy you.
Yeah. It's interesting. There was also a shame about that because there was a morality that you were responsible for yourself, which has waned. But if it's impossible to be employed, I have a feeling if there's universal basic income, you won't be able to use it for your membership at the Liberty Forum of Silicon Valley. Not good. All right, Catherine, we always want to go forth and use the information that we've received from our speakers in the best way. So if you have a wand and you can ask everybody here tomorrow morning to get up and do something with the information that they have learned from you tonight, which is a lot. Hasn't it been a tremendous amount of information?
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you to do two things. I'm going to ask you to sit down and figure out, do some sleuthing about how you can use cash. Okay, and use more cash and get 10 people to use cash. The other thing I want you to do is go to Solari and download Coming Clean and go through Coming Clean and saying, what are the things I can do in Coming Clean that will make my life better? Where can I maybe turn off that TV for 2 hours a week and pick one thing from Coming Clean that can make your life better and start to go through the process of coming clean and getting that tapeworm. You detox the tapeworm out of your wallet, your home, your mind, and your pocketbook. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you and lead us.
Before you leave, I want to read something that Catherine wrote to you. Remain standing because it's worthy of a standing ovation. Catherine said, long ago, I made a promise that I would never act against the best interest or the excellence of my own people, that I would do my best to ensure that we were worthy of the stewardship of our world, and what we did our best to leave better world for the generations yet to come. May it be so. Catherine, thank you for your hard-won insights, your dedication to our freedom, and for being with us tonight at the Liberty Forum.
Thank you for watching our presentation. Please like and subscribe to our channel to get updates on new speakers, and consider joining the Liberty Forum of Silicon Valley. You can do so at our website. If you don't want to join, but want to support the principles of American liberty, you can make a tax-deductible donation via our website. The links are in the description. Thank you again, and stay free.